My name is Margaret Thompson, and if you've lived as long as I have, you know that family is a complicated tapestry. It's woven with threads of love, to be sure, but also with strands of disappointment, resentment, and those quiet, unspoken hurts that settle deep in your bones. You learn to carry them. You learn to smile through them at birthdays and holidays, to pretend the weight isn't there. But sometimes a single event, a single moment of thoughtless cruelty, can make that weight unbearable. This is the story of my sister Carol's wedding day, the day I decided I could no longer carry the weight, and the shocking silence that followed when I finally set it down. It was a perfect Saturday in early October. The kind of day where the sun holds a golden, forgiving light and the air is crisp enough to remind you that change is the only constant. The wedding was to be held at the Grandview Manor, a place that always struck me as trying too hard, with its sprawling gardens and fountains that seemed to whisper of a wealth our family had never truly known, but which my sister Carol had married into. My dress, a simple lavender shift I'd bought on sale 2 seasons prior, felt like a shroud as I parked my sensible, 10-year-old sedan between a gleaming BMW and a Jaguar. I'd taken extra care with my hair, teasing the gray into what I hoped was a soft, elegant wave, and I wore the single string of pearls my mother had left me. They felt cool against my skin, a small, solid piece of her amidst the coming storm. I walked into the foyer, the scent of lilies and expensive perfume hanging thick in the air. The murmur of well-dressed guests was a familiar hum, a sound that had always, in these settings, made me feel like an outsider looking in. I saw my brother, David, already laughing with a group of men near the bar, his wife, Susan, by his side. She offered me a tight, sympathetic smile, and I knew in an instant that she understood the lay of the land. That was the first clue. I made my way towards the main hall, where ushers in crisp uniforms were guiding guests to their seats. I waited my turn, offering a smile to the young man with the seating chart. He scanned the list, his finger trailing down the page. Then again. A slight frown appeared on his brow. "Thompson, you said?" he asked, though I hadn't. I simply nodded, my smile feeling brittle. He conferred in a hushed tone with another usher, who glanced at me with a look I couldn't quite decipher, some mixture of pity and professional embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," the first usher said, his voice dropping to a confidential murmur. "It seems there's been a slight oversight. If you'd just follow me." He led me away from the grand double doors of the sunlit hall, away from the murmur of the assembled family and friends. We walked down a plushly carpeted corridor, past the restrooms and around a corner. There, in a wide but dimly lit hallway that served as a thoroughfare to the kitchen, was a single, small round table. It was draped with the same white linen as the others, but it was crammed against a wall, beside a service cart laden with extra glassware. On it sat one place setting, one chair. "We can pull it out a bit for you," the usher said, his cheeks flushed. It's just, with the last-minute additions from the groom's side, we were a bit squeezed for space in the main hall. I stared at the lonely chair. The sounds of clattering pans and the hiss of a dishwasher were a dull roar from the kitchen door just a few feet away. This was no oversight. This was a message, delivered with the cold precision of a surgical strike. I was 68 years old. I was the eldest sister. And at my only sister's wedding, I had been placed in the hallway. Like an unwanted parcel. Like a forgotten coat. A lifetime of memories flashed before my eyes, not in a blur, but with a painful, crystalline clarity. Carol, 7 years my junior, had always been the golden one. The one with the effortless charm, the easy laugh that could win over a room. I was the serious one, the responsible one. The one who stayed home to care for our ailing mother while Carol traveled through Europe with friends. The one who balanced the checkbook, who made the casseroles, who remembered the birthdays and anniversaries. I was the bedrock, and like all bedrock, I was expected to be solid, unmoving, and utterly taken for granted. I thought of the countless hours I'd spent listening to Carol's dramas, of the money I'd lent that was never mentioned again, of the way her successes were always celebrated while my own small triumphs, a promotion at the library, a garden that bloomed particularly well one year, were met with a polite, distracted nod. I had always told myself that this was just the way families were, that my role was to support, to be the steady hand. But this solitary chair in a noisy hallway, this was not support. This was erasure. The usher was still standing there, looking uncomfortable. "Would you like me to get you a glass of champagne while you wait?" he asked, a last, desperate attempt at hospitality. "No," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "No, thank you." I didn't make a scene. I didn't storm into the main hall to confront my sister or my brother. There was no anger, not in that moment. There was only a profound, soul-deep exhaustion. The weight I had been carrying for 6 decades finally became too much. The threads of that complicated tapestry, the ones of duty and obligation, simply snapped. I turned and I walked away. My heels made no sound on the thick carpet. I walked past the curious glances of late-arriving guests, back through the grand foyer and out into the golden October light. The air outside was clean and sharp, a stark contrast to the cloying sweetness of the lilies inside. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away from Grandview Manor. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I could not stay in that hallway for one more second. As I drove, the numbness began to wear off, and a quiet, steady clarity took its place. I had spent my life living within the lines others had drawn for me. The dutiful daughter, the reliable sister, the spinster aunt. I had defined myself by my usefulness to others, and in return, I had been placed at a table in a hallway. It was a metaphor so perfect it was almost laughable. I was not part of the main event. I was an afterthought, a logistical problem to be solved by shoving me out of sight. I found myself driving not towards my own quiet, predictable house, but towards the coast. It was a 2-hour drive, but the time melted away. I rolled down the window, letting the rushing air fill the car, drowning out the silence and the echoes of the kitchen noises. I thought about my mother, a woman who had also carried great weights, who had smiled through her own disappointments. I wondered if she would be proud of me for finally walking away, or disappointed that I hadn't stayed for the sake of family harmony. I liked to think she would have understood. The sea appeared on the horizon, a vast, shifting plain of gray-blue under the afternoon sun. I parked the car in a lookout point I remembered from a childhood trip a lifetime ago. I got out and walked to the edge of the cliff, the wind whipping my carefully styled hair into a frenzy, tearing at my lavender dress. The salt spray stung my face, or perhaps they were tears. I stood there for a long time, watching the relentless crash of the waves against the rocks below. There was a brutal, honest beauty in it. The ocean didn't care about wedding seating charts or family politics. It just was. It was powerful and free, and standing there, I felt a tiny spark of that same freedom ignite within my own tired heart. I had left. And in doing so, I had, for the first time in my life, chosen myself. The world did not end when I left the wedding. The sun continued its journey across the sky, and eventually, I got back in my car and drove home. My small house was exactly as I had left it, quiet, orderly, and filled with my own things, my books, my mother's china in the cabinet, the Afghan I had knitted draped over the back of the sofa. It felt different, though. It felt like a sanctuary now, not a hiding place. I took off the lavender dress and hung it in the back of the closet, a relic from a past life. I changed into my softest worn jeans and an old, comfortable sweater. I made a cup of tea, the familiar ritual steadying my hands. And then I waited. I knew the storm was coming. It was just a matter of when it would make landfall. The phone began to ring just after 9 o'clock. I let it go to the answering machine. It was David. His voice was tight, a blend of anger and confusion. "Margaret, where on earth did you go? Carol is devastated. We've been worried sick. There was a mix-up with the seating, for heaven's sake. It was just a mistake. Call me back." A mix-up. A mistake. I almost laughed. The careful, deliberate placement of a single person at a single, isolated table did not happen by mistake. It required intention. I did not call back. The phone rang again an hour later. This time it was Carol. Her voice was thick with tears, but beneath them, I could hear the sharp edge of accusation I knew so well. "Maggie, why would you do this to me? On my wedding day? Everyone was asking where you were. You embarrass me in front of everyone. How could you be so selfish? I listened to the message 3 times. Not once did she ask if I was all right. Not once did she express concern for why her eldest sister might have felt compelled to leave. It was all about the spectacle. It was all about her. The narrative was already being written. The unstable, bitter older sister who had created a scene. I was to play the villain in the story of her perfect day. The next day, Sunday, the phone rang incessantly. Aunts, cousins, even a few old family friends, all calling with varying tones of concern and thinly veiled curiosity. They had heard a story, of course. That I had stormed out over a minor seating issue. That I had caused a scene. I spoke to no one. I unplugged the landline eventually and turned off my simple flip phone. The silence in my house was profound, and for the first time, it felt like my own. It was not a silence of loneliness, but a silence of peace. On Monday, I went to work at the library as if it were any other day. The familiar scent of old paper and polish was a balm. My colleagues, kind women who knew me but did not know my family, noticed nothing amiss. I reshelved books, helped a young mother find picture books for her toddler, and processed new arrivals. The quiet, orderly rhythm of the place was a universe away from the emotional chaos of my family. Here, I was competent. Here, I was valued. It was on Tuesday evening that the real siege began. My doorbell rang. I peered through the peephole to see David and Susan standing on my porch, their faces set in grim lines. I considered not answering, but I knew this confrontation was inevitable. I took a deep breath and opened the door. "Margaret," David said, brushing past me without an invitation. "We need to talk. This has gone on long enough." Susan followed, offering me a pained look that seemed to say, "I'm sorry, I tried to talk him out of this." David stood in the middle of my living room, a bowl in a china shop of my newfound peace. "What the hell was that on Saturday?" he demanded, his voice booming in the quiet space. "You humiliated Carol. You humiliated the entire family." I was seated in a hallway, David, I said, my voice calm. "Next to the kitchen. At my own sister's wedding." "It was a mistake," he exploded, throwing his hands up. "A logistical error. The planner messed up the chart. For God's sake, Maggie, was it really worth destroying your sister's day over? You couldn't just suck it up for a few hours? You always have to be so difficult." There it was. The foundational belief of my family. My feelings were an inconvenience. My perception of a slight was me being difficult. For 68 years, I had accepted this narrative. I looked at my brother, his face flushed with righteous indignation, and I felt not anger, but a deep, abiding sadness. "It was not a mistake, David," I said quietly. "And I did not destroy her day. She got married, didn't she? She had her perfect wedding in her perfect hall. My absence did not change that. It only revealed it." He stared at me baffled. My calmness was clearly not the reaction he had prepared for. He had expected tears, or arguments, or capitulation. He had not expected this serene certainty. "What is that supposed to mean?" he scoffed. "It means that for my entire life, my role has been to facilitate your lives and Carol's. To be the silent, supportive presence in the background. And when I was literally placed in the background, I finally understood that I don't want to be there anymore. So I left." Susan was watching me, and I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, understanding, perhaps even envy. "This is ridiculous," David sputtered. "You're being melodramatic. You need to call Carol and apologize. You need to make this right." "I have nothing to apologize for," I said. "The person who should be apologizing to me has not done so, and I am no longer waiting for it." The conversation spiraled from there, going in circles until David, red-faced and frustrated, finally stormed out, declaring that I was cutting off my nose to spite my face. Susan lingered for a moment at the door. "He doesn't get it, Margaret," she said softly. "But I think I might. It was a cruel thing they did." I just nodded. Her small acknowledgement felt like a lifeline. In the days that followed, I began to make changes. Small ones at first. I signed up for a watercolor painting class at the community center, something I had always wanted to do but had never made time for. I went to the cinema by myself on a Tuesday afternoon, something I'd never dared to do, and saw a foreign film that no one else in my family would have had the patience for. I started taking long walks in the park, not with a purpose, but just to be. I was rediscovering the contours of my own soul, the person I was when no one was watching, when no one was making demands. It was a strange and wonderful feeling, like getting reacquainted with an old, forgotten friend. I had moments of profound loneliness, of course. The habit of a lifetime is not broken easily. The phone, once a source of constant, if often stressful, connection, was now silent. But the silence was teaching me to hear my own thoughts, my own desires. Then, the letters started arriving. The first was from Carol. It was several pages long, filled with florid script and dramatic language. She detailed how my absence had cast a shadow over her happiest day, how people were still talking, how her new in-laws thought our family was unstable. She ended with a conditional olive branch. If I offered a full and sincere apology, she would consider forgiving me. I read it once, then folded it neatly and placed it in a small wooden box I kept in my dresser. I did not reply. The next letter was from my Aunt Florence, my father's sister, a woman whose own life had been a masterclass in keeping up appearances. Her letter was full of admonishments about family duty and the importance of forgiving and forgetting. She reminded me that blood was thicker than water, a phrase I had come to despise. It was always used by the people who drew the blood to make the wounded feel guilty for bleeding. I placed her letter in the box with Carol's. A week later, a different kind of letter arrived. It was from an old family friend, Eleanor Grant. She had been my mother's closest confidant, a woman of sharp intelligence and quiet observation. Her handwriting was spidery and frail now. "My dear Margaret," it began. "I heard about the wedding. I also heard why you left. I want you to know that I, for one, am proud of you. Your mother, God rest her soul, was the kindest, strongest woman I ever knew, but she never learned how to lay down a burden that was not hers to carry. She smiled through slights that would have felled a lesser woman, all for the sake of family. I see so much of her in you, her strength, her loyalty. But I also see something she never quite managed to cultivate, a respect for her own spirit. To walk away from a deliberate insult is not weakness. It is the greatest strength of all. You are not alone in this, my dear. You have a friend in me. With love, Eleanor." I cried then, for the first time since the wedding. Not tears of sadness or self-pity, but tears of validation. Someone had seen it. Someone understood. Her words were a key, unlocking a final, stubborn chamber of doubt in my heart. I was not crazy. I was not difficult. I was a woman who had finally reached her limit. I called Eleanor that evening. We spoke for over an hour. She shared stories about my mother that I had never heard, stories of her own quiet rebellions and deep-seated frustrations. It was like meeting my mother all over again, not as my parent, but as a fellow traveler. It was a gift beyond measure. Buoyed by Eleanor's support, I began to venture further out into the world. I started having lunch with a few of the other women from my painting class. We were a disparate group, a retired school teacher, a widow like myself, a woman who had never married. We talked about art and books and our lives without the heavy baggage of familial expectation. I was learning the art of friendship, an art I had neglected for decades. One afternoon, about a month after the wedding, I was in my backyard, attempting to capture the stubborn beauty of my late-blooming roses in watercolor when I saw a car pull up. It was Susan. She was alone. I put down my brush and went to meet her at the gate. "I'm not here to fight," she said quickly, holding up her hands. I wanted to see how you were." I invited her in. We sat on the patio with glasses of iced tea. The silence between us was not uncomfortable, just waiting. "David is still furious," she said finally. "He and Carol talk almost every day, reinforcing each other's anger. They've decided you've had some kind of mental break." I smiled a little. "Have I?" She smiled back, a real, genuine smile. "No. I think you've had a mental awakening." She took a sip of her tea. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, Margaret. About my own life. About the ways I accommodate David. The ways I make myself smaller to keep the peace. Watching you, it's been unsettling, but in a good way. It's made me ask myself what I would do if I were placed in a hallway. Her honesty was breathtaking. "And what would you do?" I asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I hope I'd have your courage." We talked for a long time. She told me about the wedding reception, about the moment my absence was noted. It hadn't been a dramatic scene, she said. It had been a slow, creeping realization. A whisper here, a question there. The empty chair in the hallway, which was never moved, became a silent, damning monument. The groom's mother had apparently been horrified and had tried to have the table moved into the hall, but Carol had refused, saying it would disrupt the layout. "That's when I knew it wasn't a mistake," Susan said softly. And I think a lot of other people knew too. They just didn't say anything. It was what happened next, she told me, that truly shocked everyone. The shock wasn't a loud, dramatic event. There was no tearful reunion on a doorstep, no public denouncement. The shock was in the quiet, steadfast silence that followed my departure. The shock was that I did not break. For weeks, then months, the family waited for me to come to my senses. They expected me to crack under the pressure of the silence, the isolation. They expected me to call, weeping, begging for forgiveness, ready to resume my old role. That was the script. I had always been the one to smooth things over, to make the first conciliatory call after a disagreement. My stubbornness was, to them, completely out of character. But they failed to understand. It wasn't stubbornness. It was transformation. The Margaret they knew, the one who would have eventually apologized just to restore the equilibrium, was gone. She had walked out of the Grandview Manor and never come back. The first true sign of the seismic shift I had caused came at Thanksgiving. The invitation, which had always been a given, a simple matter of logistics, did not arrive. David called me, his tone formal and cold, to inform me that the family gathering would be at his house and that, given the current circumstances, it would be best if I made other arrangements. "Thank you for letting me know," I said, my voice even. And I meant it. I spent that Thanksgiving with Eleanor. We cooked a small, perfect turkey breast with all the trimmings, and we ate at her small, cluttered dining table, surrounded by photographs of her own, vast and loving family. We drank a little too much sherry and laughed until we cried. It was the warmest, most genuine Thanksgiving I could remember. I heard through Susan that Carol's Thanksgiving was a strained affair. The empty chair at the table was a palpable presence. The usual family stories felt forced. The joy was performative. My absence, they were discovering, was a louder presence than my compliance had ever been. Christmas followed a similar pattern. I decorated my own small tree, strung lights on my porch, and hosted a little party for the women from my painting class. We exchanged small, thoughtful gifts and sang carols slightly off-key. It was joyful. It was mine. Meanwhile, in the family I had left behind, fissures were beginning to appear. Susan, emboldened by our conversations, had begun to push back against David's autocratic style. She enrolled in a course at the university, something she had always wanted to do. She started making decisions about her own time, her own life. David, according to the occasional updates she gave me, was flummoxed. The foundation of his world, which had been built on the reliable compliance of the women in it, was starting to tremble. The most startling development came in the early spring. I received a phone call, not from David or Carol or an aunt. It was from my nephew, Mark, Carol's son from her first marriage. He was 24, a quiet, sensitive young man I had always been fond of, but whom I rarely saw, as Carol kept him on a tight leash. "Aunt Margaret," he said, his voice hesitant. I hope it's okay that I called. I got your number from Susan." "Of course it's okay, Mark," I said, my heart lifting at the sound of his voice. "I'm in town for a job interview," he explained. "And I was wondering, could I take you to lunch?" We met at a small, quiet cafe downtown. He looked older, more settled than the last time I'd seen him. Over sandwiches, he was quiet for a while, stirring his coffee absently. "I wanted to see you," he said finally, not meeting my eye. "I missed you at Christmas. And at the wedding." I waited. "Mom, she told me you had a fight and that you were very angry with her." He looked up then, his eyes, so like my mother's, full of a quiet intensity. "But that's not the whole story, is it? What did she tell you?" I asked gently. that you were upset about where you were sitting and that you left to punish her." He paused. But I talked to one of the ushers. He felt so bad about it. He said it was the weirdest thing he'd ever seen, putting the bride's sister out in the hallway like an unwanted piece of furniture. I felt a lump form in my throat. He had investigated. He had sought out the truth for himself. "Why would she do that, Aunt Margaret?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why would she be so cruel to you?" And so I told him, not with bitterness, but with a simple, factual clarity. I told him about a lifetime of being the background character in my own family. I told him about the weight of constant expectation and the loneliness of never being truly seen. I didn't ask him to take sides. I just told him my truth. He listened, his face a mask of dawning understanding. When I finished, he reached across the table and put his hand over mine. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry no one saw it." That lunch with Mark was a turning point. It was the moment I realized that my act of leaving had not just been for myself. It had sent a ripple through the entire family structure, forcing others to look at the dynamics they had accepted without question. It had given someone like Mark the courage to seek the truth. It had given Susan the courage to demand more for herself. The final, and perhaps most shocking, event happened on a bright Sunday morning in May. I was working in my garden, my hands deep in the rich, dark soil, planting annuals for the summer. A car pulled up, and I looked up, wiping my brow with the back of my glove. It was Carol. She stood by her expensive car, looking uncertain, her designer sunglasses hiding her eyes. She was alone. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting, and waited. She walked towards me, her steps hesitant on the flagstone path. She stopped a few feet away, as if afraid to come closer. "Hello, Carol," I said. She took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were red-rimmed, tired. She had been crying. "Mark came to see me," she said, her voice hoarse. He said some things. Some very hard things." I said nothing. The ball was in her court. The silence stretched between us, filled with the chirping of sparrows and the distant hum of a lawnmower. "He said I was cruel to you," she whispered, her gaze dropping to the flower bed. "He said I've always taken you for granted. That I put you in the hallway." Still, I remained silent. I would not make this easier for her. She needed to sit in the discomfort she had created. A tear traced a path through her perfectly applied foundation. I didn't. I never thought of it like that. She looked up at me, and for the first time in decades, I saw not my imperious younger sister, but a lost, frightened woman. "The planner asked where to put you." She said the head table was full with the wedding party and the in-laws. She suggested a table at the back. And I said no. I said you wouldn't mind. I said you were low maintenance. The word hung in the air between us. Low maintenance. A polite term for unimportant. For easy to ignore. "I thought you would understand," she continued, her voice breaking. "I thought you'd be the good sport you've always been. I never thought you'd leave. When you did, I was so angry. I felt so betrayed. But Mark, he made me see that the betrayal started with me." She was sobbing now, proper, ragged sobs that shook her slender frame. "I'm sorry, Maggie. I am so sorry. For the hallway. For everything." I looked at my sister, crying in my garden, and I felt nothing. No triumphant vindication. No burning rage. Just a vast, empty space where my hurt and resentment used to live. The apology had come, but it was too late to simply slot things back into the old, broken pattern. "Thank you for saying that, Carol," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I appreciate your apology." She looked up, hope flickering in her wet eyes. Hope for instant absolution, for a return to normalcy. "But things can't go back to the way they were," I said. "I'm not the same person I was before the wedding. I can't be that person anymore." The hope in her eyes died, replaced by a fresh wave of pain. "So, that's it? We're not sisters anymore?" "We will always be sisters," I said. "But the way we are sisters has to change. It has to be based on mutual respect, not on my silent compliance. That will take time. And I can't promise it will ever be what you want it to be." She nodded slowly, absorbing the finality in my words. She had come expecting a scene, either a tearful reconciliation or a slammed door. She had not expected this calm, unassailable peace. It was, I realized, the most shocking outcome of all for her. She put her sunglasses back on, hiding her wounded eyes. I'll go now. I nodded. Take care, Carol. She turned and walked back to her car. I watched her drive away, then I knelt back down in my garden. The soil was warm from the sun. The tiny seedlings I had planted held the promise of future beauty. The work was slow and patient, and done entirely on my own terms. It was a good metaphor for the life I was building. The family was shocked, truly shocked, not by my anger, but by my peace. They were shocked that I had built a full, happy life without them. They were shocked that I did not need their forgiveness to move on. They were shocked that the world had not ended for me when I walked away from them. It had, in fact, just begun. My name is Margaret Thompson. I am 69 years old. I was seated in a hallway, so I left. And in doing so, I finally came home to myself. The story doesn't have a neat, happy ending with a family reunion and tearful hugs. It's messier and more real than that. It's an ending that is, in fact, a continuous beginning. And for the first time in my long life, the path ahead is mine and mine alone to walk.